It was on the second Monday of December, in the year 1852, that 12-year-old Matthew Rindle stumbled upon the blackened doorway behind the abandoned smokehouse, just past the eastern pines, where the snow never quite settled right. Matthew had gone out to trap hares, his father's old brass snare swinging from his belt, when he noticed the tracks, not animal, barefoot, human, but the heel was too deep in the snow, as if whoever made them was sinking, dragged or staggering, and they led nowhere, just stopped, like something had risen from the ground and walked a few steps before remembering it shouldn't be seen. The boy didn't scream. He simply stared, breath fogging the air, his chapped lips trembling not from the cold, but from something he would later describe as the smell of wet rust and rotting milk. He returned home without the snare. By nightfall, Reverend Colling from the neighbouring parish had arrived. It was a small place, Dunwich Hollow, hardly marked on any official map, just 37 families, a chapel, and a general store that doubled as a doctor's office on Wednesdays. But that night, the air inside the town was stiller than snow itself. Doors latched, curtains drawn before sunset, and yet curiosity, like frostbite, found its way in. They followed Matthew's boot prints back to the old Bloodworth property. The house was still standing, barely, a square two-story relic from before the War of 1812. It had long since been stripped of anything valuable. The family who once lived there, the Bloodworths, had disappeared nearly a decade ago. Rumours whispered of bankruptcy, pestilence, or madness, depending on which porch you leaned against. The cellar door groaned open before anyone touched it. Inside was a single chair, tied to it, something human-shaped. But it was difficult to tell how much of it was person and how much had been taken. A corpse, perhaps a week old, perhaps two, missing its hands, feet, and lower jaw. The face had been scrubbed clean with ash, as if erased. A rusted fork rested neatly on a stone nearby. It was Reverend Colling who first muttered, "This isn't a grave. It's a seat at the table." They buried the body without ceremony and without a priest. That night, a meeting was held inside the chapel, lamplight flickering across warped wooden pews. No children allowed. What was discussed remains undocumented. But afterward, the entire town agreed. This must not leave Dunwich Hollow. No one told Matthew's mother what he had found. No one told the county sheriff. No one mentioned the Bloodworths. Instead, they blamed it on drifters. By morning, the cellar was sealed with 6 nails across each plank, the kind used to hold down railroad tracks. The church bell was rung only once that day, but as Matthew lay in bed that night, his mother gently pressing a damp cloth to his forehead, he whispered one thing over and over. "I heard someone chewing, Ma. I heard it, slow, behind me." Before I saw the prints, the cloth slipped from her hand. She did not ask what he meant, and outside, though no one would admit it, the snow behind the Rindle home bore barefoot prints. Again. Only this time, they did not stop halfway through. They led directly to the cellar door, which no longer had its nails. By the 3rd day after the cellar discovery, the wind in Dunwich Hollow had shifted, not just in direction, but in character. It no longer howled, it hissed, as if carrying half-finished confessions between the chimney stacks and snow-beaten fences. Inside the general store, conversation turned hesitant. Old Mr. Lawley, who had once served as the town's unofficial historian, paused mid-sentence more than once while discussing the price of flour. He would glance at the floorboards, then the window, then nod to no one in particular. Funny thing, nails coming loose, he muttered once to Ruth Blackwater, the butcher's widow. "Even the thickest kind rot when the wrong eyes are watching." Ruth didn't answer, but she didn't return the next day either. Outwardly, life in Dunwich Hollow continued. Children trudged to the one-room schoolhouse. The blacksmith's fire still crackled, and the church bell rang, though never at the same hour twice. But the town's centre of gravity shifted quietly to the postmaster's shed, where people now lingered not to mail letters, but to talk behind cupped hands and drawn scarves. It was here, among crates of soap and dusty seed catalogues, that the whispers bloomed. The first theory was practical: tramps. Men ruined by the panic of 1837, come north with starvation in their bellies and madness in their eyes. Then came the religious theory: punishment. Some spoke of an old curse, a pact made during the deep winter of 1816, the year without a summer, when the town nearly starved, and 3 children vanished from the chapel orphanage. But the most persistent version didn't involve God or strangers. It circled back again and again to the Bloodworths, specifically to Nathaniel Bloodworth's last known purchase: 7 barrels of salt pork, 1 bolt of thick canvas, and a butcher's cleaver engraved with the initials MB, believed to belong to his wife Martha. The store ledger from March 3rd, 1843, preserved in a warped leather-bound book under the counter, noted the transaction. What was odd, according to Mrs. Elsbeth Gully, who kept the books for the store until her death in 1850, was that no one recalled seeing any of the pork ever consumed or sold. More chillingly, 3 barrels were later found buried, unopened, behind the barn. But the canvas, the cleaver, never seen again. It was Martha Gaunt, the town's laundry woman, who first suggested something worse. She claimed to have seen Henrietta Bloodworth, the youngest daughter, 2 years after the family vanished. "Standing in the chapel window," she said, "as clear as I see my own breath in February." Henrietta would have been 13 at the time, blonde-haired, always clutching her rag doll, Mercy, sewn from crow feathers and an old grain sack. But her hair weren't blonde that day, Martha whispered. It was soaked and dark, hanging like river weed. Most dismissed Martha's story outright. She was known to mix lamp oil with her cider and had once accused the mayor's dog of speaking Latin. But others remembered a separate event. In 1845, a travelling pastor from Ontario had stopped in Dunwich Hollow to offer sermons in the square. After his second evening, he vanished, leaving behind only his satchel and a Bible, found open to Leviticus 26:29. "And ye shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters shall ye eat." The townspeople buried the verse under explanation. He likely wandered into the marsh and drowned. But privately, several noted that the Bloodworth cellar door had been spotted ajar again that very night. As winter deepened, so did the strangeness. Footprints appeared once more, not just behind the Rindle home now, but behind 6 others, all in a straight line, always barefoot, always small, as if made by children, but never more than one set at a time, and always facing toward the homes, never away. A farmer's dog was found skinned. A schoolgirl claimed her brother had been talking in his sleep, in a voice not his own. When asked what it said, she answered, "He said, 'They fed me to the roots, but I still chew,' over and over." The teacher sent her home. The girl never returned to school, and yet, silence. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the silence. No letters were sent, no officials notified. Dunwich Hollow seemed to fold in on itself, sealing its fears beneath the snowpack and the lies of normal routine. Those who feared the truth whispered. Those who knew more denied. And a few, just a few, wore expressions that bordered on guilt. The clearest indication came from Reverend Colling himself, who, on December 20th, delivered a sermon with no scripture and no congregation. He simply stood in the chapel and said, "God will turn his face if we keep feeding him ash. Pray, burn the canvas, and bury every hunger." Then he stepped down, removed his frock, and walked shirtless into the snow. His frostbitten body was found 2 days later. His tongue had been cut out. No one claimed to have done it. No one suggested he did it to himself. And yet, when his tongue was wrapped in burlap and quietly buried, the wind shifted again. This time, it didn't hiss. It laughed. By midwinter of 1853, Dunwich Hollow no longer uttered the name Bloodworth in daylight, but behind closed doors and in sleepless moments when the wind scraped at shutters like fingernails on slate, the townspeople remembered every unsettling detail. The Bloodworth home sat at the highest point in the valley, what some called Widow's Ridge. The road there had not been maintained in nearly a decade, but travellers noted how no grass ever returned to the path leading to their gate, even in the thawing months of April and May. Before their disappearance in 1843, the Bloodworths had been a family of 6. Nathaniel Bloodworth, born 1799, was a stonemason by trade, reputedly pious, rarely seen without his woolen vest and tobacco-stained gloves. Martha Bloodworth, née Bellamy, was his wife. Raised in French Canada, daughter of a failed missionary, she rarely spoke, but when she did, townsfolk remembered her words as clipped and archaic, as though borrowed from psalms or treaties. Their children, Henrietta, born 1830, Joel, born 1832, Mercy, born 1835, and Emmeline, born 1837. They were remembered for 3 things: silence, strange dietary habits, and never attending the town's harvest festivals. The children were rarely seen outside schooling hours, and even then, often arrived with bundled lunches packed in oilskin pouches, always tightly sealed, always cold. One teacher, Miss Abernathy, noted in her records, Joel refused all shared meals, became upset when others offered bread. He said, "Mother said food is not to be borrowed. Borrowed food makes you weak in the eyes of winter." School logbook, January 1841. Inside the home, according to the only surviving visitor, Dr. Athol Stambridge, who treated Emmeline for scarlet fever in 1842, the Bloodworth residence bore no paintings, no family Bibles, no mirrors. Instead, the walls were lined with hooks. Each hook held a dried bundle of herbs, leather cords, or wax-wrapped bones labelled in chalk. Stambridge's medical notes, housed in a cracked ledger recovered from his estate after his death in 1854, read, "No scent of illness inside, but a stench not unlike vinegar mixed with old flesh lingered in every hallway." He also noted a peculiar contraption in the cellar. Metal spokes arranged like a wheel, coated in tallow and blackened soot. The family claimed it was a curing rack for game, but Stambridge saw no animal meat, only straps, padded with cloth, human-sized. He never returned, but he never reported it either. On February 1st, 1853, schoolmaster Frederick Lorne unearthed a sealed pouch from the attic crawlspace of the schoolhouse while repairing roof joists. The pouch, stuffed between ceiling beams, contained one small doll made of crow feathers and stitch bark, labelled Mercy, assumed to be Henrietta's toy. A journal page, dated January 1843, written in a child's shaky script. It read, "They say we eat to remember. Ma cries when the snow comes. Pa sharpens the knife even when there's nothing to cut. Last year we used the neighbour's pig. This year he says there's no more lies to borrow." No one could determine which child had written it. More disturbing was a symbol marked in the corner of the page, a triangle of 3 forks, prongs touching, encircling a ring. That symbol would later be found carved into the underside of 4 pews in the chapel, under where the Bloodworths once sat. Officially, the Bloodworths were presumed dead in June of 1843, when tax collection officers reported the home abandoned, stripped of all livestock and food, but otherwise undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no notes, no bodies. And yet, the hearth was warm. The ashes in the fireplace contained remnants of clothing buttons, none matching the garments recorded in town records for the family. Some were traced to Simon Blecker, a farmhand who vanished in March 1843 after selling a goat to Nathaniel. Blecker's disappearance was never linked, until now. Perhaps the most unsettling detail comes from Hiram Tully, a photographer's apprentice who travelled through the valley in late 1842 with an early daguerreotype box. He reportedly took a family portrait of the Bloodworths, one of the first such images in the region. Tully later wrote, in a letter to his sister archived at the Hampshire Historical Society, dated October 12, 1846, "They stood unnaturally still, not uncommon for exposures that long, but there was something in the eyes, all except the youngest. Her name was Mercy. She wouldn't sit. She just stared into the lens. And in the final image, she's not there. I swear to you, May, she's not there. But I watched her the whole time." The plate image was later recovered from Tully's effects after his death in an asylum. The photo exists, but indeed, the chair meant for Mercy is empty. And in the far right background, in the window pane behind them, something stands, indistinct, thin, watching. Why did no one act sooner? Why did Reverend Colling never speak of the visitations until his final sermon? Why were the school's records incomplete for the Bloodworth children's final year? One possible answer lies in the margins of the town's old meeting book, where a faint scribble appears beneath the 1843 attendance roster. They are not gone. They are under whether metaphor or direction is unclear. What is known is this: the cellar door that had been nailed shut was not built by the Bloodworths. It was built by the town in 1832 to seal the remains of the previous tenant, a fur trapper who had confessed to winter starvation-induced cannibalism before dying of frostbite. His name was never recorded. His initials, however, match the cleaver, M.B. And though the Bloodworth family has been gone for over a decade, 5 graves at the edge of Widow's Ridge were found disturbed last spring. Soil shifted, stones cracked, bones missing. None of the headstones bore names, but one of them had a child's rag doll resting on top. Its crow feathers had been plucked. The first public rupture in the fragile calm of Dunwich Hollow occurred on the evening of February 6, 1853, just after sundown. At precisely 5:14 p.m, a fire broke out in the northern wing of the Bramford Orphan Home, an ageing clapboard structure that had housed 8 children under the age of 12. Built in 1825, the home had stood through 2 floods and a locust plague. Its stone hearth, chimney flue, and insulated walls had been refurbished less than 2 years prior, using funding from the church council. But this fire behaved wrong. 3 witnesses, Deputy Leander Cloak, Sister Marion Hawthorne, and Jacob Bell, a stable hand, swore that the flames were colourless, not invisible, but translucent, like heated air seen above asphalt, and cold. The smoke rose, but no heat followed. Bell claimed he felt frost on his fingertips as he tried to beat back the spreading line of flame with a woolen blanket. Inside, no furniture burned. Only the linens, only the beds, only where the children had slept. 5 survived, 3 did not. The bodies of Tommy, age 9, Eliza, age 11, and Rowan, age 7, were found in identical poses, fetal, eyes wide open, teeth clenched tight as if resisting a scream. No burns, no soot in their lungs, no cause of death the town's doctor, Elias Merkson, could name. In his sparse report, dated February 7, 1853, and signed only with an X, he noted, heart and lungs intact, skin pale but unmarked. One strange sign, stomachs empty of food, despite dinner eaten just hours before. Teeth worn at odd angles, as if from prolonged clenching. Eyes, glassy and fixed, like those of the starved. None of the 5 surviving children remembered the fire, but each of them, when interviewed separately, recalled the same detail. I woke up because I heard someone chewing, just slow, like how Pa eats stew when it's too hot. At the next Sunday sermon, Reverend Malcolm Tithe, who had replaced Colling after his death, spoke without notes. He told the townsfolk, "This is not the work of God's wrath, nor Satan's games. It is what happens when hunger becomes a language, and memory learns to feed itself." Then, with no explanation, he boarded up the chapel's western door and hung a child's spoon from the lock. It was engraved with the letter M. In the weeks following the orphan home fire, several attempts were made to rationalize the event. A physician from Hampshire, Dr. Julian Creeley, visited on February 13th and examined the bodies. He dismissed the coal fire theory as shared hysteria induced by smoke inhalation, but privately noted something stranger in a letter to his colleague, archived at the Lowell Medical Exchange. The bodies exude a scent not of death, but of broth. Faint, savoury, and beneath the tongue of one child, I found what appeared to be a sliver of cloth, stitched in a pattern resembling bone. Religious authorities were no more helpful. The diocesan committee declined to intervene, calling the fire an unexplained but isolated tragedy. No priest would visit, no rites were offered. The town remained sealed. On the outskirts of town, farmers began reporting missing livestock, not in dozens, not all at once, but always one animal at a time. A single lamb, a runt calf, a blind goat, taken quietly, without tracks. In each case, the enclosure remained locked, but straw was found pushed aside in a spiral, always clockwise, always centered where the missing creature had lain. Then came the letters, folded slips of parchment, unaddressed and unsigned, began appearing in doorways and under pillows. Their contents varied, but all shared a final line. We must eat to forget. The roots are hungry. Deputy Cloak attempted to collect them. He managed to gather 6, but by morning all had turned brittle and illegible, crumbling like over-dried parchment. And in the church's offering box, beneath the usual silver pennies and trinkets, someone left a severed thumb, wrapped in linen, wearing a child's ring. In early March, Annabel Rindle, mother of young Matthew, who first discovered the prints near the Bloodworth cellar, began suffering waking dreams. She'd be seen standing in the fields before dawn, whispering as though to children gathered around her. When approached, she would stop, tilt her head and say only, "They don't remember who they were. They think we're still family, she was taken in for observation. A week later, she vanished from her locked room. The sheets were undisturbed, the window unlatched. In the yard below, footprints circled the house, 11 small ones, and one larger, barefoot, deeper than the rest, as if carrying weight. Among the few surviving written records from this time is the personal journal of Marion Cobb, the schoolmistress. On March 12th, 1853, she wrote, "The children no longer draw trees with leaves. They draw teeth, rows of them, always pointing down, and when asked who the drawings are for, they all say the same word, mercy." She underlined it twice. Marion Cobb died the next day. Her house collapsed inward, though there was no earthquake, no explosion. The beams and walls folded down, as if pulled by unseen hands. In the rubble, the only object found intact was a small chalkboard. One word was scratched into it: more. Is this the beginning of mass madness? A haunting tied to sin? A relic of starvation and secrecy that became sentient in the cold hollows of a forgotten winter? Or is it, as some now believe, Dunwich's penance made flesh? And if so, who gets to decide when the hunger ends? By the second week of March 1853, the rhythm of Dunwich Hollow, the quiet churn of chores, church bells, and shop shutters, had dissolved into suspicion and sleeplessness. Residents no longer greeted each other at crossroads. Doors were answered only through slits. Lamps burned until morning, and mothers began laying salted bread above their children's heads before tucking them in, muttering an old rhyme that had no known origin. Bread above and bones below, let mercy pass and never know. There had been no snow for 5 days, but the cold intensified. In the blacksmith's logbook, still preserved in the Flint County Archive, the entry for March 14th, 1853 reads, "Coldest, morning yet. Ground hard as oak, water froze in the forge bucket, and yet I found wet prints on the anvil. He never opened the smithy again." The next turning point came with the disappearance of Henry Tott, a recluse and self-proclaimed historian who lived in a shack along the south edge of Widow's Ridge. Henry had long been considered an eccentric nuisance, too fond of dusty records, obsessed with lineage, and prone to knocking on doors late at night to correct errors in the family trees. But he was also, undeniably, the last person in town who remembered the Bloodworths in detail. He claimed to have once apprenticed under Nathaniel. No one believed him, until he vanished. The door to his shack was found open on the morning of March 16th. No sign of struggle, his bed untouched. His boots, however, were missing, and so was a single page torn from his ledger, nailed to the wall with a rusted skewer. It read, "It's not about hunger, it's about memory. They don't feed to survive. They feed to remain inside a chest at the foot of his bed." Investigators found something worse. A set of family birth certificates, all belonging to the Bloodworth line. But one name had been added in pencil: Mercy Bloodworth, reborn 1853. No such birth was ever recorded. On March 18th, Mr. Thane Holloway, the town's only candle maker, set fire to his own home. It burned for 6 hours and took half the street with it. When pulled from the wreckage, barely alive, skin blistered and eyes scorched, his final words, spoken to Dr. Merkson, were, "They used my wax to seal the mouths. I saw the dolls. I saw them chewing. Every time I lit one, I heard her say thank you." He died shortly after. A surviving ledger from Holloway's shop revealed a peculiar sale dated January 12th, 1853, 12 pounds of wax, purchased by M. Blood, paid in teeth, 6 molars and 2 canines. No one could confirm who accepted the payment. Amid the growing fear, one child broke ranks. Thomas Merrow, age 10. After the fire at the orphanage, his behavior became erratic. He drew constantly in school, dark tunnels, figures with backward feet, and hollow faces wearing stitched masks. He was punished, but kept drawing. Finally, during morning prayer at school, Thomas stood and announced to the class, "She's not gone. She's in the floor. She eats what we don't say. She told me not to tell, but I wrote it down." He was taken home immediately. That evening, his father found Thomas in the cellar, curled into the ash pile beneath the stove. Alive, but catatonic. He held a piece of slate on which he'd scratched 5 letters, over and over. M-E-R-C-Y. He never spoke again. 2 days later, a package arrived at the schoolhouse addressed to no one. Inside, Thomas's drawings, neatly re-inked and bound in fine calfskin. The title on the cover read, "To Remember Us Kindly, Volume 1. There were no fingerprints. No one admitted sending it. Desperate for logic, the remaining council members summoned Dr. Percival Ray, a mentalist and scholar from Boston. He arrived on March 21st, wearing a bowler hat and quoting Spinoza. His first act was to request access to the Bloodworth home. 3 men accompanied him, Deputy Cloak, Judge Averley, and a hired labourer named Whit Runnels. They entered at noon. By dusk, only Cloak returned. He had aged in the space of 6 hours. His coat was gone, shoes soaked in brine. He said nothing. Only handed Reverend Tithe a length of blackened string tied into a noose. Attached was a tag. Found on the crib post. The nails are back, but they were never ours. Judge Averley's body was found 3 days later, wedged between the belfry beams of the chapel. His head had been turned backward, yet there were no signs of force. His eyes were open. Runnels was never found. Dr. Ray's journal, left behind in the snow near the Bloodworth cellar, offered one final line. They eat the memory first. So we forget to run. In the following week, 17 families fled Dunwich Hollow. Some went north. Some vanished along the river trail. Some burned their homes before leaving. Others simply disappeared. Beds still made, kettles warm. The church bell no longer rang. And on the 7th night after the Bloodworth home was entered, a sound was heard from the ridge. Not a scream, not a howl, just chewing. Slow, measured, as though savouring. By late March of 1853, Dunwich Hollow had dwindled to less than half its former population. Those who remained locked their doors with iron latches, salted their thresholds, and spoke little. Fear had mutated into ritual. Habit had given way to superstition. But history, as always, refused to stay buried. On March 29th, a group of 3 gravediggers, Gideon Hale, Samuel Tretch, and a mute boy known only as Ebb, were assigned to relocate the graves from the northern bluff. A landslide earlier that year had rendered the hill unstable, and the coffins were being moved to higher ground behind the chapel. What they found was not decay, but absence. Of the 12 graves, only 2 contained human remains. The other 10 caskets were filled with strips of cured leather, child-sized clothing stitched with hair teeth, arranged in neat concentric circles, and in one case, an unlit candle moulded around a tiny femur. Ebb reportedly screamed for the first and only time in his life. Beneath the last grave, deeper than the rest, nearly 8 feet down, they struck stone. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a vault door made of iron, with an engraving at the center, 3 forks touching at the tips, encircling a ring, the Bloodworth symbol. Records indicate the grave diggers alerted Elder Tithe. who in turn summoned 2 remaining town elders and a mason. The vault was opened on March 30th, 1853, at 4:17 p.m. What lay inside defied easy explanation. The chamber, roughly 15 feet wide and 12 feet deep, contained no coffins, no sarcophagi. Instead, 9 chairs, arranged in a circle, made from oak and antler bone. A ledger, bound in tanned hide, resting on a stone plinth. And in the centre of the room, a well, no more than 3 feet across, sealed with a wax disc. The ledger contained no names, no dates, just a repeating phrase, page after page. We eat to remain. We remember to remain. We offer to remain. Then, a break in the pattern. Page 78. Written in a different hand. She was the first to resist. She starved herself. But memory is stronger than bone. So we made her the vessel. And the child grew fat on silence. The page bore a fingerprint. Not ink. Blood. Dried, flaked, and now archived in a sealed evidence envelope stored at the Flint County Historical Archive, catalogued under 1853-03-BW-Mercy. At this point in the historical trail, documents begin to appear from beyond Dunwich Hollow. A clipped article from the Hampshire Gazette, dated November 12, 1844, describes a family of 6 gone missing in a night near the valley's edge. The piece mentions an empty house, warm embers in the hearth, and an uneaten stew on the table. The name Bloodworth is not used, but the image accompanying the article, a sketch of the house, matches the known outline of the Bloodworth residence, down to the split window above the door. A different clipping from the Hartford Examiner, dated October 5, 1820, describes an unrelated event. A man arrested in Dunwich Hollow for grave robbery. He claimed he had been instructed by a girl in his dreams. When questioned, he said, "She told me they needed marrow." The winter took it all. The accused man, Miles Crickshaw, died in custody after biting off his own fingers. His final words were recorded by the attending magistrate. "Mercy is hungry. She remembers too much." Then came the final artifact, discovered years later in 1898, during the renovation of a church in neighbouring Leighton Ridge. A hollow in the altar produced a sealed scroll, oilskin wrapped and intact. Inside was a confession. Reverend Elijah Colling, presumed mad and deceased in 1853, had written it in dense, meticulous script. In 1833, I was among the 5 who signed the covenant. We believed we could contain it, bind it to the stone beneath Widow's Ridge. But belief is not burial. The hunger feeds on absence, on names removed from record, on bodies replaced with false bones, on tongues bitten off and prayers half-whispered. The Bloodworths were not worshippers. They were jailers. The children were offerings. Mercy was the lock, and now the key is loose. I see her in dreams, in mirrors, in steam. She smiles with no lips. She remembers what the town chose to forget, and she waits every winter. In one final eerie thread, a letter was mailed to the Flint County Registry in 1923. Postmarked from Providence, Rhode Island, it was unsigned, but the envelope contained a simple family tree, traced back to Henrietta Bloodworth. At the bottom, a name circled in red ink, M. Rindle, born 1906. A note attached read, "The teeth don't pass down, the memory does. So what remains buried beneath Widow's Ridge? Was Mercy truly a child, or a creation, summoned by ritual, shaped by famine, and sustained by silence? Is she a symbol of generational guilt, or something older, something parasitic, something bound not by time or space, but by forgetting. One thing is certain. The ledger from the vault is missing. Its last known location, the schoolhouse archives, 1951. It was checked out by a man named Matthew Rindle Jr. It was never returned. The last recorded event before Dunwich Hollow was wiped from all postal registries occurred on the night of April 3rd, 1853. A moonless Sunday, 3 days after the vault beneath Widow's Ridge had been uncovered and hastily resealed. It was meant to be a night of prayer. What unfolded instead was remembered, by the few who lived long enough to tell it, as the gathering. It began at 6:12 p.m. when the school bell rang. The schoolhouse had been shuttered since Thomas Merrow's collapse. The bell had no rope, no one had access, and yet it rang, 12 times, slow and even, each peal colder than the last. By 6:20, smoke was seen rising from the chimney of the Bloodworth house. The house had been abandoned for 10 years. There was no firewood inside. By dusk, a crowd had gathered on the road to Widow's Ridge. Some carried lamps, some carried weapons. A few came barefoot, in nightgowns, eyes vacant. The air was warm, unusually so for April. The ground, however, remained frozen, hard as iron, impossible to dig. Witnesses described a sour weight in the air, as though a stew left too long on the stove had been poured into the soil. And then came the sounds. Not screams, not chanting, chewing, measured, rhythmic. Like a family seated at supper, a fork against bone, a jaw working against gristle. Several fled. Those who remained, 18 in total, approached the Bloodworth cellar. Its door, resealed days earlier with iron nails and prayer-writ sigils, now hung open. Inside, the 9 chairs recovered from the vault, and seated in each, a child, clothed in wax-dipped rags, eyes open but hollow, smiles stretched too wide, mouths twitching, even as they chewed nothing. And in the centre, on a stool that hadn't been there before, sat Mercy, small, thin, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. Her dress was stitched from pages, ledger sheets, birth records, school logs. Her hair was blackened rope. Her fingers glistened with what appeared to be tallow. She did not blink. She did not speak. But one by one, the others in the room, those gathered in fear or faith, fell to their knees and wept, not in terror, in recognition. By sunrise, the Bloodworth house was empty again, but 37 townspeople were never seen again. Not only the 18 who entered the cellar, but 19 others across the valley, a mother and daughter from the Eastern farmstead, the baker's entire family, and 4 orphans under the chapel's care. Gone, vanished, no signs of struggle, no blood. But in every home left behind, investigators found one item out of place: a half-burned candle on a dining table, a child's shoe filled with salt, a silver fork left outside the door, a mirror turned backward, a bowl of soup left untouched, still warm. The surviving records from the state relief team that entered the hollow weeks later included this note. Food was present in every home, fresh, untouched. In one case, stew was still boiling on the hearth, despite no fire beneath it. There were no teeth in the bowls, only indentations, as if someone had fed, and then remembered they shouldn't be seen. There is one last piece in the historical record, a telegram sent from a nearby township by Constable Edward Hales, dated April 7th, 1853. It was addressed to the State Marshal in Boston. The telegram read, "Dunwich has been consumed, not by flame, by memory. Do not send aid. Do not dig. Do not pray. She is still chewing." In October of 1974, a group of university students from Amherst College conducted an unauthorized historical ghost hunt in the valley, once marked as Dunwich Hollow. They documented their trip using Super 8 film, cassette recordings, and written logs. The footage ends abruptly at the 6-minute mark. The final frames show a cellar door, bare earth, a child's chair. The last audible word on the tape, spoken by one of the students, voice trembling, fading, is, "She's eating my name." All 3 students disappeared. Their vehicle was found abandoned, covered in a thin wax coating. The steering wheel bore bite marks. None of them have been found. The only item recovered from their gear was a cloth doll. Feathers missing. A name tag stitched to the front. Mercy. So what lingers beneath the frost-thick soil of Dunwich Hollow? Is it a child cursed by starvation? A spirit made from memory? A town's guilt turned flesh? Or something older? Something born from the need to be remembered, even if it must eat to remain? As of today, Dunwich Hollow appears on no maps. But locals say, if you drive the old route in winter and pass the 6th-mile marker at night, you'll feel it. A faint warmth on your left side. Like breath, like soup, like something waiting, something chewing. When spring came to Dunwich Hollow in 1853, there were no bells, no ploughs, no singing children in the fields. There was silence, and silence alone. What remained of the town was catalogued by outsiders, not survivors. County officials sent a relief party in May, led by Marshal Ephraim Lott. His written report, preserved in the Boston State Archive, is chilling in its economy. All homes abandoned, food left on tables, bedding turned down as if for sleep. No bodies recovered, no livestock, no birds. Air still, as if the town itself had been smothered. Report of Marshal Lott, May 17, 1853. The last census, taken in 1852, had counted 212 souls in Dunwich Hollow. In 1853, the number was 0. By summer, the state declared the valley uninhabitable due to geological instability. The phrase was repeated in public notices across Hampshire County. In reality, what happened next was deliberate erasure. Maps printed after 1855 omitted Dunwich Hollow. Postal records marked all correspondence addressed there as undeliverable. Even church registers removed the names of its congregants. The town, once a small but living community, became a blank space, as though memory itself had been fed upon. Marshal Lott recommended burning the Bloodworth house. It was attempted twice. Each time, the flames sputtered as if doused by water. The timbers blackened but never collapsed. The cellar door remained intact, so instead, the ridge was sealed with quarried stone. A cairn was erected, bearing no names, only an inscription. It is finished. But was it? Fragments suggest otherwise. In the decades that followed, whispers of the hollow resurfaced, sometimes faint, sometimes undeniable. 1871. A railway surveyor recorded in his notes that his compass failed within 2 miles of the abandoned valley. He marked the location with an X and wrote, "I heard chewing. In the wind. Never again, 1902. A letter from Reverend Hale of Leighton Ridge describes a girl wandering into Sunday service, barefoot, thin, clutching a rag doll missing its feathers. When questioned, she said her name was Mercy. The girl vanished during the closing hymn. 1936. During a Works Progress Administration survey, a team of engineers rediscovered the cairn. Beneath it, they noted moisture seeping through cracks, despite drought conditions. The water tasted faintly of broth. Their report was quietly archived, then lost. The Bloodworth ledger, recovered from the vault, survived for nearly a century. It was transferred through hands, from county officials to archivists to university collections. By 1951, it resided in the Flint County Schoolhouse Archive. And then it vanished. The sign-out slip bears a single name, Matthew Rindle Jr. No record of his return exists. His descendants, if any, have not come forward. What became of the ledger is unknown, but its absence is perhaps the most telling clue. For a book that fed only repetition may itself have required memory to remain alive, and by removing it from the archive, someone, intentionally or not, unsealed that hunger. Today, the location of Dunwich Hollow is obscured. Some claim it lies north of the Ashfield Marshes. Others that it is closer to the abandoned stone quarries west of Hatfield. Locals shrug or deny knowledge. The valley is not marked. Roads leading there are overgrown, unnamed or broken by deliberate detours. But in winter, travellers report strange occurrences along those routes. Windows fogging though no breath is present. The faint sound of chewing in still air and the sudden weight of silence, as if the land itself has stopped listening. In 1974, the Amherst students vanished during their ghost hunt. In 1996, a hunter reported finding a cellar door where no house stood. When he returned with others, the door was gone. Only a circle of salt remained in the snow, and in 2011, hikers near the Ashfield Ridge claimed they heard a child humming. The tune was unfamiliar, but in old-school records from 1842, a line of music appears at the bottom of a page, bread above and bones below. Historians argue over the nature of Mercy Bloodworth. Was she a child cursed by famine, a psychological projection of communal guilt, or something older, an entity bound to the act of remembering? The evidence suggests she was not merely victim nor villain, but vessel. She appears in family records as both child and absence. Witnesses describe her as thin, silent, yet smiling, never growing older. And in every account, her presence is linked not to hunger, but to memory. Perhaps she was a ghost. Perhaps she was the town itself, given flesh. Perhaps she was neither. What is certain? Mercy endured, long after Dunwich Hollow was gone. In 2019, a sealed envelope surfaced in the Hampshire Historical Society archives. It bore no date, no sender. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, a child's handwriting. We ate to remain. We remembered to remain. We still remain. I am not gone. I am only hungry. At the bottom of the page was a crude sketch of a triangle. 3 forks touching, encircling a ring. The ink was fresh. So what remains buried beneath the stone cairn? What lies in the silence of erased maps and unmarked graves? Is Dunwich Hollow merely a forgotten valley, or the scar of a hunger that still waits every winter for the world to remember? And if remembering feeds it, what are we doing now by speaking of it again? If you followed this story to its unsettling end, consider this. Would you have eaten to survive? Or do you believe there are hungers worse than death? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more explorations into history's darkest corners, where silence is never truly empty.